When 38-year-old Darnell Pierce boarded the train that morning, he didn't expect the man in uniform, Sergeant Whitaker, to single him out in front of everyone. No explanation, no cause, just skin color, stripped of dignity, accused of theft he didn't commit. Darnell stood frozen as whispers turned to stares. But this wasn't the first time, and this time he wouldn't stay silent. What happens next will shock you. The truth always fights back. Subscribe now if you believe justice must be louder than hate. Darnell's story isn't just his, it could be anyone's, and it demands to be heard. Darnell Pierce didn't sleep that night. After the humiliating encounter with Sergeant Whitaker on the train, the moment kept looping in his mind, how the officer had yanked him from his seat, how strangers avoided his eyes as if his silence made him guilty. He walked into the police station wearing the same hoodie he wore on the train, head high. He asked for an official complaint form. The receptionist stared, then walked away. 10 minutes passed, 15. Then a different officer came out, not to help, but to ask him if he was lost. When Darnell mentioned Sergeant Whitaker's name, the officer's smile disappeared. "You should probably let this go," he said with a cold finality. But Darnell didn't. He started recording videos on his phone. He posted the first clip online. 2 views, then 5, then 100. He spoke from his living room. No flashy edits, just pain and truth. "I didn't deserve that," he said, voice shaking. "No one does." The comments were a mix. Some supportive, others cruel. "Play the victim," one said. "Bet he did steal something," another wrote. It hurt, but it didn't stop him. He reached out to local reporters. No one responded. He tried community groups. Silence. It felt like pushing against a wall that only moved to crush him. A week later, he started getting strange texts. Anonymous numbers, messages like, "Drop it. You want your family safe, right?" At first, he brushed it off as internet trolls, but one morning his car tires were slashed. Then he noticed a patrol car parked down the street for hours daily. Not moving, just watching. Fear crept in, not for himself, but for his younger sister, Nia, who stayed with him. She was just 17, still in high school, full of dreams. Darnell wanted to protect her. He told her nothing, and always asked her to tell him where she was. Always still. He pressed forward. He gathered witnesses. One woman on the train agreed to speak with him. Her name was Clarissa, a middle-aged white woman with gentle eyes. "I saw everything she said." "You didn't do anything wrong." That officer was looking for someone to shame. They recorded an interview together. Clarissa spoke clearly and honestly. "It was wrong, and if I stay quiet, I'm part of it." That video gained traction. 4,000 views, then 12. Then news outlets finally started calling, but not to help. They asked things like, "Do you have a criminal record? Were you raised by both parents?" Darnell's heart cracked every time. Why did the truth have to pass so many filters to be seen? And then came the visit. Sergeant Whitaker himself knocked on Darnell's door late one evening. No warrant, no backup, just him, tall and threatening in the hallway shadows. "You're making noise," he said with a smirk. "That's dangerous." Darnell didn't let him in, but he shook the whole night. The next day he called a lawyer, couldn't afford one, but begged for advice, without proof of direct harm or threat. The lawyer sighed. "It's hard to pursue. Be careful, be careful. That was all anyone ever said. Be careful, be quiet, be gone." But Darnell wasn't built that way anymore. He tried to hold a press conference outside the train station, just him, Clarissa, and a homemade sign that read, "I am not your threat." A few people stopped to listen. Others passed by. Then 3 uniformed officers appeared and told him to disperse public disruption. They said. He showed them his permit. They took it, crumpled it, and pushed him back. "Cameras caught the shove," Clarissa screamed. The footage was blurry but real. That night it was uploaded and shared, views exploded. People started tagging local officials, demanding accountability, demanding answers. But Darnell didn't feel safe. He started seeing shadows in every alley, paranoia, maybe. But when someone tried to break into his apartment that weekend, it stopped being a maybe. He rushed Nia to their aunt's house on the other side of town, ensuring she was safe. "You don't have to do this," she begged him. "They're trying to break you." He hugged her tightly. "They already did," he whispered. "But they're not going to bury me too." He stayed quiet for 2 days. Then I posted one last video. His voice was calm, eyes steady. "If anything happens to me, I need you to know it wasn't an accident. I don't want sympathy, I want justice. And not just for me, for all of us who walk around daily wondering if we'll be the next headline, the next hashtag. I'm Darnell Pierce. I'm a human being. And I'm not afraid anymore." The video ended with a simple line. "Share this if you believe my life matters." The screen faded to black to hear what happens next. Subscribe to the channel. Darnell's fight isn't over, and the truth is only beginning to rise. Darnell Pierce had always believed that if he kept his head down, worked hard, and treated people with respect, life would eventually be fair. That belief shattered on that cold Thursday morning, when Sergeant Whitaker dragged him from the train for no reason other than the color of his skin. But that humiliation wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The video Darnell posted afterward gained attention but was not protected. Instead, it made him a target for people who didn't want to hear about racism, who wanted him to get over it, and worse for those in power who wanted him silenced. Within days, the threats turned physical. A brick went through his window, and his apartment door was scratched with the words, "Liar." Darnell reported it. No one came. And when he went to the precinct himself, the desk officer laughed. "Maybe you threw the brick yourself," he said. That was when Darnell realized this wasn't just a one-off incident. This was a system, and he was trapped in it. He didn't sleep much after that. He started checking every lock, every curtain. But still, he kept going, writing down everything, collecting videos, reaching out to people who had also experienced abuse from the same officer. He started piecing together a disturbing pattern. Whitaker had a history. Complaints that vanished. Victims are too scared to testify. Darnell compiled the documents in a binder and called it the Quiet War. It was his mission now, but the deeper he dug, the more it cost him. He lost his job after his manager pulled him aside, apologizing awkwardly. "You're drawing too much attention," she whispered, "and the company can't be associated with controversy." Darnell nodded, biting his tongue so hard he tasted blood. It wasn't just a job. It was his only income. Bills started piling up. Then came the eviction notice. His landlord claimed the building was being renovated, but Darnell knew better. He packed his things silently, Nia crying as she held their cat, Jasmine. He moved them into a small, aging motel on the city's edge, where roaches shared the walls and the tap ran brown. Nia missed school for a week. Darnell spent his days searching for work, dodging headlines that called him a race agitator and trying to keep the tears hidden behind cheap motel curtains. He instantly contacted a civil rights lawyer, Andrea Reye, who believed him. "I've seen this too many times," she said. "We'll fight this together." One day, while walking to the convenience store, Darnell was jumped by 2 men in ski masks. "They didn't rob him. They just beat him," one whispered. "You should have stayed quiet before cracking a rib with his boot." Darnell lay in the alley, bleeding into the pavement, teeth loose, pain flaring in his chest. No police report was filed. The hospital staff barely looked him in the eye. The attack made headlines, but not in the way he expected. One local paper ran a story questioning if it was staged "Activist Claims Assault." The title read, followed by an article filled with doubt and loaded language. Darnell's heart broke. Reading it, the comments beneath were worse. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Another thug trying to get famous. He couldn't believe how quickly the world could twist the truth into a weapon. His phone rang less after that. Some allies disappeared. Clarissa, the woman who had once stood by his side, sent a tearful voicemail saying she couldn't handle the stress. "My job's on the line, Darnell. I'm sorry." He didn't blame her, but the loneliness hurt more than the bruises. Naya stopped smiling. She stopped painting. "Danielle started having nightmares. They're going to take you away," she said one morning, clutching his arm. Darnell sat with her on the stained motel bed and promised her the same thing he always did. "I'm not going anywhere." But he didn't know if that was true. There were nights he thought about quitting. At night he cried in the bathroom, so Nia wouldn't hear nights. He whispered to the ceiling, "Why me?" But he knew the answer. It was because he was black. He dared to speak out when silence felt like the safer choice, and he was fully aware of the consequences, yet refused to let fear dictate his actions, because the truth, no matter how painful, is necessary. Then came the worst blow. She had always told him to stand tall, to be proud of who he was. "Your skin is not a threat," she used to say. Darnell hadn't seen her in months, too afraid to bring danger near her home. She died from a stroke alone in her kitchen, while Darnell was in a TV interview, trying to explain why his life mattered. The guilt crushed him. At her funeral, he sat in the back, away from the crowd, feeling like he'd failed everyone. "She was proud of you," an uncle told him. But all Darnell could think about was how she died worrying, and he wasn't there. Still, he pressed on. The lawsuit moved forward. Andrea stood by him, even as her office was vandalized. "We're close," she said one night, showing him a list of others coming forward. "You started something real." But that night their motel room door was kicked in while they slept. Darnell fought the attacker off with a lamp. He shielded Nia with his own body. Police took 30 minutes to arrive. They arrested no one. The manager gave them 48 hours to leave, blaming them for the disturbance. No apology, no empathy. They moved into a homeless shelter after that. Darnell took odd jobs, washing dishes, cleaning floors, and doing anything to feed Nia and keep her safe. But his fire never dimmed. He continued recording videos, each one more raw than the last. He told the world everything. The train, the silence, the beatings, the fear. "If you're tired of seeing this," he said in one video, voice breaking, "imagine living it." The video went viral, 10 million views. Suddenly people cared. Celebrities retweeted it. Journalists reached out. And most importantly, other victims came forward. Sergeant Whitaker was placed under internal review, the suspension, then finally termination. It should have felt like victory. But Darnell felt numb, because no job loss could bring back his peace. No firing could undo the pain Nia carried in her eyes now. No public statement could restore his trust in the system. He testified in front of a packed courtroom, telling his story while Whitaker smirked across from him. But Darnell didn't flinch. "You tried to break me," he said. "But I'm still here, and I'm not done." Afterward, community leaders invited him to speak at schools, youth groups, and city council meetings. He became a voice, a symbol, a scar that refused to fade. He and Andrea launched a foundation called Still Here, offering legal help and housing to victims of racial abuse. People donated. People cared. But Darnell never let the pain leave him. He carried it as a reminder of the motel, of the alley, of his mother, of every moment he thought it was over and it wasn't. Now he walks the streets with Nia again, not in fear, but with purpose. He still locks the doors twice, still checks over his shoulder, but he walks tall, Because truth doesn't come without a price, and he paid it in full to those who have followed his story and believed in him when the world tried to silence him. Darnell Pierce says, "Keep speaking, keep showing up, because one voice can survive, but 1,000 can change everything." Subscribe now. If you stand with Darnell, his story is not over, and neither is the fight for justice. The cold didn't bother Darnell Pierce anymore. Not like it used to. It was the silence that haunted him now, the silence after the protests died down. The silence after the press turned its gaze to the next outrage. The silence after his voice, so full of fight and fury, began to sound like an echo in a canyon that no longer answered back. After Sergeant Whitaker was fired, people called it a victory. But Darnell didn't feel victorious. He still woke up to the same ceiling, still felt that slow-burning knot in his chest, and still saw how Nia flinched at loud knocks or flashing lights. The damage wasn't just done. It had rooted itself in every corner of their lives. And when the spotlight dimmed and the crowd moved on, Darnell found himself standing at the edge of a new question: what now? He tried to rebuild, brick by emotional brick. He applied for jobs again this time, under the cautious hope that maybe his name was no longer a red flag. But HR departments were polite and vague. "We've decided to move in a different direction. We appreciate your interest." But he knew the script by now. The truth was, he wasn't just unemployed. He was marked, labeled too loud, too risky, too controversial. Even in his neighborhood, some eyes lingered longer than before. Not with admiration, but discomfort. "That's the guy from the videos," they whispered. Sometimes he felt less like a survivor and more like a spectacle. And yet he kept moving, kept showing up at community meetings, kept mentoring kids who were already seeing the world tilt against them. He started visiting high schools where students had never met someone who fought back and lived to tell the tale. But telling it wasn't easy. The words cut each time, describing how he was yanked from that train, how the world turned its back, how he had to choose between food and shelter while fighting a legal war. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told the truth because the truth needed to be heard. "They tried to erase me," he'd say, "but I'm still here, and that means something." Then came the fire. Late one night, smoke curled through the vents, while he and Nia were asleep in their new apartment. A tiny unit secured through a community housing grant. Darnell shot up, coughing the air thick and bitter. Flames licked the hallway before he could even grab his shoes. He threw a blanket over Nia, kicked out the back window, and pulled her through, just before the living room exploded behind them. They escaped with nothing but their clothes and each other. The fire marshal called it an accident, but the note taped to the mailbox the following morning said otherwise. "You were warned." Darnell didn't cry. He just held Nia's hand tighter. "We're gonna be okay," Darnell whispered, voice shaking. But inside he was breaking again. They moved into a shelter temporarily again. It felt like a cruel loop, every step forward, greeted with another slap backward. But the difference now was that people were watching. His followers had grown into the hundreds of thousands, and when he shared the story of the fire, when he posted the charred remains of their home, and the hateful note, the internet erupted. The pain he had buried rose like a tide. "I'm tired of surviving," he said in the video. "I want to live. I want my sister to live. I want a life that doesn't punish us for being teen." His voice cracked. "If you believe we deserve that, don't just scroll. Let them know we're not invisible." That video hit millions. Donations poured in, messages of love, offers of help, but also more threats, always more threats. Darnell learned to live with them. Don't fear them. Because silence had already almost killed him once. Now he chose volume. He chose visibility. He decided on the truth even when it burned. He spoke at national conferences, now alongside senators and activists. He appeared on panels and documentaries. He was writing a book, and yet none of that erased the pain in his bones or the scars on his trust. He still flinched when someone in uniform walked by, still checked his car mirrors at every stoplight, still taught Nia how to raise her hands slowly if she was ever pulled over, even though she was barely 18. One afternoon, he visited the train station, the same one where it all began. He stood at the platform watching the trains arrive, faces blur past like ghosts. It had been almost 2 years, and yet he could still hear Whitaker's voice in his head, still feels the eyes on him, still remember the sting of shame he had no reason to carry. But instead of running from it, he filmed it, set up his phone, looked into the camera and said, "This is where I was broken, but it's also where I found out who I was." His voice was low but firm. "They tried to erase me here, but this is where I begin again." The video went viral. Again. But more than views, it brought healing. Survivors messaged him. Mothers who lost sons. Teenagers are afraid to speak up. Retired officers who confessed to regrets. Darnell read every single one, cried over many, replied to as many as he could because this wasn't about him anymore. It never really had been. He was just the mirror, the wound, the proof. But there were nights he still broke down. Nights the pain crept in when the cameras were off and the lights were low. Nights when Nia fell asleep early. The quiet felt like a cage. Nights when he scrolled through hate comments and tried not to believe them. Nights when Darnell wondered if this fight had stolen too much. "I miss who I used to be." He admitted once, in a live stream, tears clinging to his lashes. "Before I was just a case, a cause, before I knew how ugly this world could be." He paused, then smiled softly. "But I also love who I've become. Because I'm still standing, and that's worth something." Darnell Pierce's story is far from over. He's still battling systems that would rather silence him, still standing in courtrooms that pretend to listen, still rebuilding a life that was nearly torn apart by hate. But he's also building something else, hope. Not the fluffy kind, the kind that bleeds, the kind that holds your hand when the fire comes, the kind that whispers, "Keep going," even when you're down to nothing. So, if you've made it this far and followed Darnell's story from the beginning, from that brutal train encounter, through the threats, the fire, the silence, the fight, then now is the moment to show him he's not alone, not forgotten, not erased. Press the like button right now, not just for Darnell, but for every voice still trembling in the dark, for every story that's been buried, for every person too afraid to speak. Let your click be a candle in the night. Let it tell the world, we see him, we hear him, we believe him, and we're not done fighting either. Darnell Pierce vanished for 3 weeks. No live streams, no videos, no posts. His supporters, those who had followed every moment of his journey from the day he was pulled off that train by Sergeant Whitaker to the fiery destruction of his apartment, were left stunned and worried. Some thought he was finally silenced, others feared the worst. But what none of them knew was that during those 3 weeks, Darnell was somewhere no one could have predicted inside one of the state's oldest maximum security prisons, not as an inmate, but undercover, wearing a name tag that read "Facilities Maintenance, Scrubbing Floors," while listening to whispered secrets no one else was supposed to hear. He wasn't supposed to be there. His lawyer had begged him not to go. "This isn't your fight alone," Andrea Reyes warned him. But Darnell had uncovered something bigger than Whitaker, bigger than his case. Something so deeply buried, it felt like fiction, and he couldn't walk away. Not now. It started with a file. An unmarked envelope slipped under the door just days after the fire. No return address. Just 3 words written in black Sharpie. Keep digging. DP. Inside were photocopies, case numbers, internal memos, redacted reports, all connected to a forgotten name. Officer Terence Crow, a man who had disappeared from public records 5 years ago after a supposed early retirement. But the file told a different story. Crow wasn't gone. He had been reassigned to a covert surveillance unit operating out of the very prison Darnell would later infiltrate. And buried deep in those memos were references to something called Tier 9, a program that, from what Darnell could piece together, used fabricated misconduct reports to justify enhanced monitoring, mainly targeting black and brown men. Darnell saw names, hundreds of them, most of them labeled inactive, transferred, or unverified. The deeper he read, the more it chilled him. These weren't just files. They were footprints of erasure. So he disappeared quietly, told no one but Naya, who clutched his arm the night before he left, and whispered, "Come back different." Not gone, with forged paperwork provided by an anonymous source. He still doesn't know who he entered the prison as a low-level contract worker. The place was a fortress of concrete and secrets. Guards with blank stares, inmates who looked through him like glass. For days he cleaned floors, emptied bins, and mopped blood. No one reported, but he listened. And slowly, the stories began. From an elderly inmate named Rufus, who claimed he had once been arrested by a man who disappeared mid-investigation, from a young man named Antoine, who said his brother was locked in solitary confinement for months for requesting a transfer. Darnell took mental notes, memorized corridors, and studied cameras. Then one night he found the hallway. It wasn't on any map. No signs. Just a gray door at the far end of the administrative wing, hidden behind stacks of cleaning supplies. Inside was a makeshift surveillance room. Monitor servers, a wall lined with folders labeled behavioral forecasting. He scanned them, his hands shaking. Dozens of inmates were flagged as extremist risk, not because of actions but because of attitudes. Darnell knew what that meant. Thought crimes, bias-coded algorithms. He snapped photos, downloaded files to a hidden USB, then backed out quietly. But someone saw him. The next night, 2 guards cornered him near the boiler room. "Who are you really, one?" sneered. Darnell stayed calm, just the janitor. But his hand was already on the wrench in his belt. When they moved in, he swung hard. One went down. The other grabbed his radio. Darnell ran through tunnels, through locked doors he'd watched others use. He reached the outer lot just before sunrise, vaulting over the fence with torn palms, and a heartbeat loud enough to hear from space. A contact car was waiting. The driver said nothing, just handed him a phone. A voice on the other end said, "You got it," Darnell replied. "I got everything." He emerged 3 days later. Face thinner, eyes sharper. The internet roared back to life. "He's alive. Where have you been?" He didn't say much, only posted a teaser video titled Tier 9 Exists. It spread like wildfire. Reporters called. Whistleblowers reached out. Former inmates confirmed what he saw. The prison denied it. The state launched an internal audit, which most called a PR stunt. But Darnell didn't care. He had the files. And more than that, he had stories now, real ones, names with faces, people who had lost years to silence. His new mission was clear. Expose everything. But power doesn't fall easily. Someone tried to run him off the road the day after he released the first set of documents. Naya was in the car. Darnell swerved into a ditch, flipping twice. Miraculously, neither was seriously hurt, but the message was loud. Stop, he didn't. He moved Nia to a safe house, started wearing a bulletproof vest, hired a bodyguard with donated funds. He worked around the clock collecting more evidence and preparing a documentary with Andrea and a filmmaker named Malik, who once directed civil rights exposés. They planned a surprise screening at the state capitol, invited lawmakers, media, and survivors' families. Darnell stood backstage that night, his hands trembling as the lights dimmed. "This is it," Andrea whispered. "You sure?" Darnell nodded. "I was born sure." The film played, and silence filled the room. Then came the gasps, the tears, the outrage. One legislator stood mid-screening and shouted, "This can't be real!" But it was. And by the end, no one doubted it. The crowd stood, applauded, some wept. The documentary aired nationally. Within 48 hours, Darnell Pierce became a name in protest circles and American history. The Tier 9 program was suspended. Investigations launched, retired officers subpoenaed, public outrage surged. But even with all that, Darnell stayed grounded. He still lived simply, still answered messages at midnight, still made time to sit with survivors and hear their truths, because he hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be pulled off that train like trash. He hadn't forgotten the motel, the beatings, the fire. And he knew there were still prisons in this country with doors no one talked about. Still people are buried beneath algorithms, still lies painted as policy. So he keeps going, every day. And as you hear this now, he's likely out there visiting another shelter, filming another testimony, protecting another voice from being silenced. His story sounds unbelievable, like a movie, but it's real. Every bruise, every escape, every act of defiance, all of it. And now it's your turn to speak. Leave a comment right now to tell Darnell he's not alone. Tell him his fight matters, that you see him, that you stand with him, because the world tried to erase him. And you can be the voice that writes him back into history, sometimes when the nights are too quiet and the air presses in like a weight. Darnell Pierce still hears the voice, cold, smug, and laced with power. Step off the train. That moment, frozen in the amber of injustice, still pulses beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. It started there, on a commuter train packed with indifferent eyes, when Sergeant Whitaker dragged him out of his seat and into a nightmare simply because he was black. No evidence. No cause, no apology, just suspicion wrapped in a badge. That humiliation was supposed to break him, but it didn't. It transformed him. What followed wasn't a simple rise. It was a war filled with sleepless nights, burnt down homes, bruises that didn't heal right, and a truth so loud it threatened to rupture the silence. America begged him to sit in. For months, Darnell endured not with peace, but with grit. He confronted systems that preferred him to be quiet. Darnell fought for his sister's safety, for his mother's legacy, and for every person who knew what it meant to be targeted for the skin they never chose. But behind all that bravery was a man hurting deeply, cut by betrayal, hunted by fear, and desperate for the one thing he couldn't buy: beg or borrow freedom. The more he spoke, the more dangerous it became. The deeper he dug, the more powerful the names got. It wasn't just Whitaker anymore. It was judges, wardens, surveillance operatives, and tech firms running behavioral analytics on black men's social media profiles Darnell uncovered. Tier 9 infiltrated a prison to retrieve the files, got nearly killed more than once, and when he escaped battered and haunted, he wasn't celebrated. He was questioned, discredited. Some praised him, but others asked, "Are you sure this isn't just for attention?" As if risking your life was a publicity stunt, as if surviving state-sanctioned terror was a career move that burned worse than any beating. But still, he held on, until the night they came for him. He and Naya had been moved to a government safe house after the Tier 9 exposure. Windowless concrete walls, guards outside. But on that night, Darnell sensed something off. The guard rotation had changed, radio static filled the hall. And then a knock, not the usual rhythm, slower, deeper. He pulled Nia into his closet and told her not to make a sound. Then he grabbed the metal pipe under his cot. When the door burst open, the lights went out. He swung, unthinkingly heard a grunt. Then a gunshot, not aimed at him, but fired upward to disorient. Smoke filled the room. They were after the files, after him, the man who held the truth they wanted to bury. He chose at that moment not just to survive, but to escape. To break out of the cage they built around his truth. What followed was chaos. Darnell snuck Naya out through the back utility shaft, used the training he learned from a former Marine activist who once taught him escape routes in case things ever got real. That night it got too real. They crawled through filth, cut their palms on rusted metal, and held their breath as boots stomped above them. But they didn't stop even when Nia started crying. Even when Darnell thought his heart would explode from fear. They made it to the surface. Hijacked a maintenance truck. They drove blind through darkness for hours until they reached an abandoned barn that one of their allies had marked on a map weeks before. There, Darnell finally exhaled and broke down. They had almost died for telling the truth. He looked at Naya, exhausted, shivering but alive, and realized this wasn't just a personal story anymore. Racism wasn't just in the voices yelling slurs or the officers holding cuffs. It was in every system that protected those who abused and punished those who spoke. It was in a way that no one helped on that train. It was in the articles that framed him as angry but never wounded. It was in the broken bones, the lost jobs, the endless, lonely fight. But even as his heart felt shattered, Darnell knew he couldn't stop. Not now, because if he gave in, they'd win. And everything tear, every scar, every friend lost along the way would mean nothing. So from that barn, bruised and broken, he uploaded one final video. No edits, no effects, just the truth. His eyes are red. His voice is hoarse, but steady. He told the world everything. How it started with a single racist act, and how it spiraled into surveillance programs, silencing state violence, and an escape that nearly killed him. They wanted me quiet, he said. They wanted me gone. But I'm still here. And if you hear this, then you will see me. And if you see me, you know this can't happen again. That video didn't just go viral. It erupted. Millions watched, commented. Cried human rights groups authenticated the footage from the prison. Former insiders confirmed the escape. The public outrage turned into protests. A Senate investigation was launched, charges filed, Tier 9 was dismantled publicly, its algorithms ruled unconstitutional. And Darnell, he was cleared, given whistleblower protections, offered book deals, speaking tours, but none of that erased the trauma. He still sleeps with the light on, still has scars on his back, still cries when he remembers his mother dying while he fought for justice. She didn't live to see. Still hugs Naya longer than he used to, because victory doesn't heal everything. It only proves that survival was worth it. Darnell now leads a foundation, Echo 9, which helps protect others like him, activists, survivors, truth-tellers, but he doesn't see himself as a hero. He sees himself as a warning. This is what happens when you challenge the silence. And yet he doesn't regret a single second, because through it all, he learned what freedom means. Not safety, not comfort, but truth, without fear. And now he's asking you to carry it forward. If his story moved you, if you felt the fear in that train station, the fire in that escape, and you cried knowing how much he lost and still refused to be broken, Then show him he's not alone. Drop a comment right now to tell Darnell you see him. Tell him his pain wasn't wasted, that you hear his voice. Because in a world that tried to erase him, your words keep him written in history. After the Senate hearings ended and the applause faded, Darnell Pierce sat alone in his hotel room, staring at a cracked ceiling tile, as the weight of everything he'd survived finally came crashing down. He had testified under oath. Darnell had watched powerful men squirm under questions they never expected to answer. He had heard the word systemic failure, spoken by officials who used to call him a liar, and yet all he could feel was emptiness. Because the system's breaking didn't mean he was fixed. The audience had clapped. The cameras had flashed. But when the lights went off, the nightmares stayed. The trauma didn't clock out just because justice rang once in the halls of government. In the weeks after his escape, he'd barely slept. Every siren outside his window made his chest seize. He lived with the constant fear that another door might burst open, another smoke bomb might roll across the floor, another bullet might be meant for him. And worst of all, he started to wonder if freedom was just a new kind of prison, one made of expectations, fame and pressure, never to let the pain show. Nia was safe, living under a new name in another state and starting school again. But she barely called. Not because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't talk about what happened without crying. Darnell understood. He missed her fiercely, but he carried her silence like a shield. Let her heal, he told himself. Let at least one of us breathe. But the truth was, even surrounded by bodyguards and legal teams, Darnell had never felt more alone. The interviews became exhausting. The constant need to explain, to retell, to relive it drained him. He was invited to gala events in suits he couldn't afford, praised by people who had never once stood on a train and felt their humanity stripped away by a badge and a smirk. They called him brave, but no one saw him sitting in his car afterward, gripping the wheel, shaking in silence. Then came the hate mail. He thought exposure would bring safety, but it only brought new enemies. Anonymous letters slipped under his door. "We know where your sister is. Dead men don't give speeches." One package contained a noose made from shoelaces. Another, a charred photo of his mother. He stopped telling Andrea, his lawyer, about them. She had enough stress. He just started sleeping with the lamp on again, started checking the locks 3 times. He told no one when he started getting nosebleeds, headaches, and panic attacks in the middle of interviews. No one noticed when he disappeared from the stage one night, mid-speech, and vomited backstage while an aide called it just nerves. His body was crumbling under the weight of survival, but the world kept asking him to carry more. That's when he made the mistake of returning to the neighborhood where it all began. He hadn't planned to. He was just driving aimlessly, trying to feel something real. The city had changed. New condos, new paint, but the shadows were the same. He passed the train station, parked, walked in. He stood on the same platform Whitaker had humiliated him 2 years earlier, and he froze. The tiled floor seemed to tilt. The crowd blurred. A security guard walked by, and Darnell's knees buckled. He backed into a corner, trying to breathe, trying not to cry or scream. A teenager recognized him, took a photo. "Hey, you're that guy from the video." Darnell couldn't speak. He just stumbled into the street and drove until he didn't know where he was. He checked into a motel under a false name and stayed there 3 days eating crackers and staring at a wall. That's when the fever started. Doctors later said it was stress-induced exhaustion combined with an untreated infection. He collapsed in the shower, hit his head, and woke up in a hospital 2 towns over. No phone, no wallet, no memory of how long he'd been unconscious. The nurse who found his ID recognized his name. "You're the one who exposed Tier 9, she whispered. "I watched your testimony. You were incredible." He smiled faintly, but tears leaked down his cheeks. Because being incredible didn't stop the pain. Being inspiring didn't stop the nightmares. He left the hospital against medical advice and disappeared again this time, not to expose a secret, but to survive his healing. He spent the next month off the grid, staying at a safe house owned by a retired civil rights leader, Mrs. Clara Mays, who offered him soup and silence. It was the first time in years he didn't feel watched. She didn't ask questions, just sat with him at sunrise humming spirituals from her youth. "You don't have to be strong here," she said once, brushing his hand like a mother, and something inside him broke open. He sobbed for nearly an hour. She held him the whole time. During that month, Darnell kept a journal, wrote letters he never sent, spoke to no cameras, answered no calls. He let his body recover, let his soul grieve, and slowly something returned. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. Not the loud kind that marches and shouts, but the quiet kind that rises at dawn and decides to live again. He began planning a new project, not to expose, but to rebuild. A trauma center for survivors of police violence, not just legal aid, but therapy, housing and care, a place where broken things could be tended, not displayed. He called it the Ember Room, because even in ashes, embers still burn. When he returned to the public eye, people noticed the difference. He smiled more, moved slower, spoke with a softness that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, but grace. He shared his hospital story. Shared the panic, the collapse, the healing, and the world listened, not as followers, but as witnesses, because now it wasn't just a story of injustice, it was a story of survival, and survival in a world that wants you gone is a revolution. Darnell Pierce is still fighting, but he's also forgiving, still organizing, but also resting, still demanding justice, but finally allowing joy to return in pieces. He writes poems and essays now. He teaches workshops on resilience. He sits in rooms with kids who say, "I didn't think I could make it, but then I saw you," and he tells them the truth. It's hard, but you're worth the fight. And if you've made it this far, if you followed Darnell's journey from that first moment on the train to the courtroom, to the barn, to the hospital, to this new chapter of rebuilding, then this is your moment too. Drop a comment to let Darnell know you're still with him. Tell him you saw the whole journey, that you remember, because after everything he's survived, your words can help carry the next weight. And in case no one's told you lately, you matter too. It was supposed to be a quiet day. Darnell Pierce had just finished leading a community grief circle at the Ember Room, the trauma center he had poured his soul into building. Sunlight cut gently through the tall windows, warming the worn couches and faded rug, where survivors had spent the last hour sharing stories no one else wanted to hear. Stories of chokeholds and silence courts that closed doors and neighbors who looked away. Darnell had listened to it all, nodding, sometimes crying, holding someone's hand while their voice broke. He lived in these moments now, not for recognition, but for healing. Andre wasn't chasing exposure anymore. He was building something steady, human, alive. And for the first time in a long while, it felt as though maybe he could finally breathe. But healing, he would learn yet again, is not linear. And peace for someone who dared to tell the truth is always fragile. That afternoon, as he cleaned up the empty mugs and passed by the corkboard of missing persons and newspaper clippings that lined the entryway, a man entered, white mid-40s, sunglasses, denim jacket, average in every way except for the energy he carried. Darnell felt it immediately, something cold rehearsed. The man smiled too quickly. "You're Darnell, right?" Darnell hesitated. Yeah, can I help you? The man stepped forward. I watched your speech, the one where you called the justice system a cage. Darnell blinked, okay. The man grinned wider. I work in corrections. I just came to say not all of us are cages. Darnell nodded, cautious. We welcome dialogue here, but this space is for healing, not debate. The man shrugged. Fair enough, just thought I'd see what a professional victim looks like up close. And with that, he turned and left. Darnell stood frozen, heart pounding. It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Like a dare. Like a warning. And in his gut, Darnell knew this wasn't over. That night, the Ember Room was broken into. Not vandalized, violated. Every photo on the memory wall was torn down. Files scattered. A knife was stuck into the front desk with a note. Fire always dies eventually. Darnell arrived just minutes after the alarm. The police took hours to show up. No fingerprints, no video, no arrests, just trauma, fresh and personal. He stared at the knife for a long time. Then at the wall, where a photo of his mother had once hung. It was gone. He didn't speak, just swept the glass, taped up the ripped posters, and sat down in the same chair where hours earlier someone had whispered, "You helped me believe again." The next day he posted a video, not dramatic, not loud, just honest. "Someone came for us last night," he said, his voice steady, not with fists or fire, but with fear, with the hope that we'd stop showing up. But I want to be clear, we're not going anywhere. We've been burned before. And all that did was teach us how to rise. He paused. If you've ever felt scared to speak or exist, this space is still yours. We'll rebuild again, and again until they learn that love doesn't die. It just grows quieter and stronger. The video went viral. Again. But this time, something else happened. People showed up in person. Hundreds, with candles, with flowers, with hammers and nails. They helped repair the damage, painted murals, read poetry. For days, the Ember Room overflowed with laughter and life. Darnell stood among them, overwhelmed, remembering all the nights he thought no one would come. Remembering the barn, the hospital, the courtroom, the motel, and now this. It didn't erase the pain, but it made it bearable, until Nia called him trembling. She had received a message on her new school email, a screenshot of their old apartment burning with the words, "You can't hide forever." She hadn't slept in days. Her grades had slipped. She didn't want to tell him because she didn't want to be another weight. Darnell's heart shattered. "You're never a weight," he whispered. "You're the reason I'm still here." He took the next flight out under the radar and found her in her dorm, curled up and shaking. He held her all night. The next morning, they walked through campus with sunglasses and hoodies, trying to be invisible. But you can't disappear once the world has written your name in flame. And by noon, 2 men in a car were tailing them. Darnell noticed first. Pulled Nia into a cafe called Andrea. "We need extraction now." Andrea didn't ask questions. "We'll reroute you through federal protection. Just hang tight." But Darnell couldn't wait. He saw the men get out of the car, so he ran. Hand in hand with Nia, they burst out the back door through alleyways into side streets. No destination, just instinct. They ducked into a church where an old pastor recognized him. "You're the one from the news," he said. "Come." He led them down a back stairwell to a quiet prayer room, locked the door. "Stay here. I'll get help." They waited for hours. The world above was spinning while they sat in stillness, trembling. That night, federal agents arrived, escorted them out again. Another safe house, another name, another beginning, and still, Darnell didn't stop. He launched a second Ember Room location. anonymously funded in the South, started. Writing a memoir. Titled it Smoke Signals. In interviews, he spoke less about the danger and the aftermath. The hardest part, he said once, is convincing yourself that survival isn't selfish. He cried when he said it, and millions watched him cry, and millions cried with him. Now, he travels with an armed escort. Creeps, speaks loudly. Still reads every comment. Still replies to strangers at 2 a.m. when they say, "Your story saved me." But make no mistake, he is still hunted, still haunted, still human. And if you've followed this story, if you remember the train, the fire, the prison, the panic, the barn, the ember room, the chase, the silence, the scream, then you know what it costs to stand up when everything around you tells you to kneel, and now he needs you again. Press the like button right now, not just for Darnell, but for every survivor who watched their truth be doubted, for every sister who hid in closets, every truth-teller who ran for their lives, and every ember still burning in the ashes of hate. Let your click be a shield, let your voice be a light, let him know we still see you, we still believe you, we still need you. And Darnell, we're not done walking with you. Years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. Headlines faded, investigations concluded, policies shifted in ways that made politicians feel good, but didn't always reach the people who needed them most. But somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, in a building once nearly burned to the ground, Darnell Pierce stood on a small wooden stage, not as a protester, plaintiff, or survivor, but as a teacher. Behind him, a wall full of portraits, people who once thought they had no story until someone listened. In front of him, a room full of teenagers, wide-eyed, restless, curious, angry at the world, but unsure where to point it. "I know what it's like to be seen as a problem before you speak a word," he told them. His voice gentler now, but still sharp enough to cut through doubt. "I know what it's like to wonder if your life matters, and I'm here to tell you it does, even when they try to erase you, even when they tell you to stop fighting. Especially then." Some nodded. One wiped tears. A teacher in the back recorded on her phone. And Darnell smiled, not for the camera, but for the moment, because this was why he survived. He never stopped. Building. The Ember Room grew into 5 locations nationwide, healing storytelling and resilience spaces. He published 2 books. The first, Smoke Signals, told his journey's raw, unfiltered truth. The second, The Quiet Rebellion, was a guidebook for young activists trying to speak up without getting swallowed. Both became national bestsellers. But Darnell never wrote for fame. He wrote because words saved him when the world didn't. Darnell wrote because silence almost killed him, and he knew someone out there still needed to read the line, "You are not a threat. You are a testimony." He stayed close to his sister Nia, who graduated from college with honors in social work. She started a foundation of her own, focused on protecting children affected by racial trauma. She still called him Big Bro in texts, still hugged him like the world could break at any moment, still cried sometimes when the lights were low and old memories surfaced. But she was strong, braver than she knew. Darnell once told her, "You're the reason I didn't disappear," and she replied, "You're the reason I believed I was worth protecting." The threats eventually slowed down, not thoroughly, but enough. That is enough for Darnell to retake long walks without checking every car, enough to sleep through most nights without gripping the pillow in panic, enough to sit on a bench outside the Ember Room and not feel like a target. But the scars remained. Not just the ones you could see, the one on his ribs from the alley, the one on his arm from the fire, but the ones inside, the ones that whispered, You are only safe if you stay useful. He wrestled with that. Therapy helped. Faith helped. Time helped. But what helped most was seeing others rise because he waited. He visited train stations now without flinching. Not all the time, but sometimes he even spoke at the very one where it all began. The city renamed the platform Pierce Square, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That place was no longer just a site of pain. It was a site of proof that dignity could be stolen but not defeated, that silence could be broken, that one man unarmed and unafraid could bend the arc of injustice just enough for light to spill through. And if there's one thing Darnell Pierce would want you to know, it's this: never believe the lie that your voice is too small. Never believe the lie that your pain is too inconvenient. Never believe the lie that the system is too big to break. Because he believed those lies once, and it nearly cost him everything. Scrolling past injustice is easy when it doesn't knock on your door, easy to shake your head, sigh and say, "That's terrible," while pouring your coffee. But injustice feeds on that ease, thrives in that silence, grows in that indifference. Darnell's story reminds us that we are all part of the system, which means we can all be part of its transformation. You matter, whether you speak out, stand beside someone, share a story, or offer a hand. And to anyone who's ever been made to feel small, invisible, unwanted, this story is yours too, because Darnell wasn't just one man. He was a mirror reflecting the struggles of so many others, their pain, their fight for recognition. A fire, an ember that refused to die. He walked through pain so someone else could walk through healing. He broke so someone else could be made whole. He screamed so that someone else could whisper and still be heard. So if his journey moved you, if it made you angry, made you cry, or feel something real in a world that too often feels numb, don't just leave, do something. Press the like button right now, not for the algorithm, but for the truth. Let Darnell's name echo through time, because you chose not to stay quiet. Let your comment be a digital rose placed at the foot of his courage. Tell him what his story meant to you. Tell him you believe in him. Tell him you'll keep going too. Because Darnell's story may end here, but the fight is not. And subscribe to this channel. If you want to hear more stories like this, true stories, human stories, stories that challenge the silence and stir the soul, not just for content, but for connection, for courage. Because somewhere out there, another Darnell is boarding a train, and he will need you in his corner when the world forgets his name. Don't let it. Like, comment, subscribe. Not for us, for him, for you, not even close.